At the Asheville airport, my daughter pressed a ticket into my hand and said, "Relax, Dad." Their car rolled away before I could ask a thing. The ticket one way. Last night they'd hurried me to sign housekeeping papers, my home's deed. That cut deeper than any winter wind. I've lived long enough to stay calm when it hurts. What they didn't know, my late wife left a letter and a lawyer with a sealed backup of the real deed. One clause they never saw. Their calls turned frantic while I planned a family meeting that would flip everything. Stay with me to the end. Comment the city you're watching from, and please subscribe to the channel. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan filled the old house as dusk settled in. The walls around me still carried her, my late wife's smile caught in faded photographs. Her presence lingering in small touches I never had the heart to change. The place wasn't grand, but it had warmth. Tonight, though, that warmth carried an edge of unease. Melinda and Travis sat across from me at the kitchen table, papers spread out like an uninvited guest. My daughter's smile was practiced, too bright, too careful. Travis leaned back in his chair, his voice smooth and confident, the kind of voice that had always put me on guard. They called this a visit, but it felt more like a business meeting. The document sat between us, the kind of thing a man like me wasn't meant to face alone. My eyes caught the bold header, property transfer agreement, but the fine print blurred under the weight of their words. "Dad, this will just make everything easier for you," Melinda said, her hand brushing against mine. Her touch used to reassure me, back when she was little and clung to me after a nightmare. Tonight, it carried something else: urgency, expectation. Travis leaned in, tapping the top page with his finger. "Think of this as protection. Simplifies your estate, avoids complications later. Banks love clarity." His grin was polished, the kind that hides teeth rather than shows them. The air grew heavier. My instincts whispered that this wasn't help. It was pressure. For a moment, I heard my wife's voice in memory, soft and steady, always read carefully. "Leroy, don't let anyone rush you." Still, here I was, pen in hand. A knock at the door interrupted the rhythm of my doubt. Travis had arranged a favor, his banker friend stepping into my home, briefcase in hand, suit too stiff for a neighborhood like mine. He shook my hand with a firmness meant to convince me more than his words ever could. "Just a formality," he assured, nodding toward the paperwork. "Purely legal housekeeping." I glanced at Melinda. She couldn't hold my eyes. My daughter, who once clutched my arm at county fairs, who cried when I left for deployment, couldn't meet her old man's gaze tonight. That cut deeper than the banker's spiel. They spoke in circles: probate, liability, protection. I knew enough to recognize when language was used to box me in. The shame stung hardest, being treated as though my mind had dulled, as though age had softened not just my body, but my sense. My chest tightened with a storm of memories. Every overtime shift, every dollar saved, every lecture given about honesty and standing tall, these moments had built Melinda's path. And now she sat silent, watching as her husband orchestrated my undoing. The pen felt heavy when it touched my hand again. I searched for the strength to resist, but the room swam with expectation. "This really helps you help me?" I asked, my voice cracking, though not from weakness, from disbelief. Their smiles came too fast, rehearsed, hollow. The scratch of ink on paper echoed louder than any sound in that house. Each letter of my name felt like chiseling away at the life I had built. The ink dried fast, but the unease in my chest lingered longer than any signature ever could. The next morning, the smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen before I even opened my eyes. It had been years since anyone brooded in this house other than me, and for a moment, I let myself believe it was my late wife, back again, humming softly by the stove. But when I walked into the kitchen, it was Melinda, sitting there with a wide, bright smile, a cup already waiting for me. "Morning, Dad," she said, her voice too cheerful, too polished. She slid the mug toward me as if it had been planned. The steam curled into my face, and the first sip told me something was off. Too sweet, almost syrupy. Melinda knew I liked it plain, always had. That sweetness clung to my tongue like a mask, trying too hard to cover something sour beneath. Her smile didn't falter. She leaned forward, hands wrapped tight around her own cup, watching me as though she was gauging my reaction. That cheerfulness had an edge. I sat down slowly, pretending not to notice the tension pressing against my chest. "Everything's taken care of now," she said softly, as though reminding me of last night. "You don't need to worry anymore." The way she said it, rehearsed and too smooth, made the hair rise on the back of my neck. My daughter used to blurt out the truth before she even thought about it. As a little girl, she couldn't keep secrets if she tried. But now, the woman across from me sipped coffee like a stranger, eyes darting toward the window as if avoiding mine. I forced a small chuckle. "Taken care of." That easy, of course," she said quickly. "Now you can just relax." Her words echoed, not comforting but hollow. Relax, as though I had no place left but the sidelines of my own life. The kitchen door creaked, and Travis walked in, hair still damp from the shower. He smiled in that practiced way of his, patting my shoulder with the weight of ownership rather than care. "Morning, Leroy," he said, stepping over to the counter. His hand brushed against the drawer where I kept old letters and important papers. He didn't look at me. He looked at the drawer, then quickly away. He reached for my pillbox, lifting it like he had some right to inspect it. "Just making sure you're keeping up with these," he said, shaking his head with a grin. "Don't want you forgetting." Right, it was all too much. Too careful. Too staged. His hand lingered on that drawer, a second longer than it should have. I swallowed the rest of the coffee, though the taste turned bitter in my throat. "Appreciate your concern," I muttered, watching his eyes instead of his hands. Concern wasn't what I saw, it was calculation. He set the box down gently, then leaned back against the counter, arms folded like he owned the place. Melinda kept smiling, nodding along as though the two of them were actors in a play I hadn't agreed to watch. For a moment, I closed my eyes and remembered another voice, a fellow veteran's advice: the enemy smiles before he strikes. The words drifted back like smoke, wrapping around the moment, fitting too well with what I was seeing now. They were trying too hard. I wanted to believe in my daughter, to trust that blood was thicker than any scheme. But the unease sat heavy, and the taste of that coffee clung to me like a warning. Suddenly, Melinda stood, gathering her purse. "We've got errands to run." "Dad," she said quickly, almost too quickly. Travis followed, his hand brushing my shoulder again on the way out, leaving a trace of something I couldn't name. The door closed, and silence swallowed the kitchen. I stared at the empty cup in front of me, the coffee already cold, a thin film on the surface catching the morning light. My own whisper broke the quiet. What exactly did I sign? The sweetness of that drink had faded, leaving nothing but bitterness behind. I sat there with that empty cup, realizing sweetness can be the cruelest disguise. The week slipped by quietly, but the weight of unease never left. Late one afternoon, I stepped out onto the porch to gather the mail. The air carried the dampness of early spring in Asheville, the kind that clung to my jacket and crept into my bones. Most of the envelopes were the usual utility bills, catalogs, a coupon flyer or two, but one stood out crisp, official-looking, with my name printed neatly on the front. The return address read like any ordinary bank. Still, my chest tightened. Opening it, I found a credit card bill. My name was on it, yet I had never applied for such a card. The balance stunned me. Thousands of dollars in charges, hotels, fine dining, shopping sprees all in the past month. My life was simple groceries, the occasional dinner at the diner, church donations. None of these purchases were mine. Confusion swirled into disbelief. I lived too modestly for anything like this. My late wife and I had always prided ourselves on staying out of debt, raising Melinda without luxuries, but with love and discipline. And now this. The numbers blurred as anger rose. My memory pulled me back to Melinda's words weeks earlier about streamlining finances. She had brushed off my questions, saying she just wanted things easier. The timing, the signatures, it all began to fit. Regret burned deep. That paper I signed the deed might have opened more than just my house to them. Maybe my name itself had been signed away. Trust had become a weapon in their hands. I sat heavily in the living room, the bill clutched tight. The mantel above the fireplace still held photos of my wife, her smile frozen in time. What would she say if she saw me now outmaneuvered by my own child's silence pressed in? Every swipe of that card felt like a piece of my dignity sold off. My name, my honor, used like a key to a door I never wanted opened. Something drew me back to the porch. Digging through the stack again, I found more letters crammed behind the junk mail, another credit notice. Then one stamped in red, overdue payment notice. My stomach dropped. This was bigger than I thought. If they could steal my name on a card, what else had already been taken? My savings, my house, my future. The debt wasn't mine, but the shame carried my name. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon. Melinda's voice was bright, almost too bright, as she insisted I join them for dinner that weekend. "Dad, it'll be good for you," she said, layering her words with warmth that sounded practiced. Something in her tone told me this wasn't just a family dinner. It felt like a performance she needed me to attend. Saturday evening. I drove to their house. The driveway was lined with cars, and from the outside, the place looked more like a showroom than a home. Gleaming fixtures, tall windows, and a yard trimmed within an inch of perfection. Inside, the air smelled of roasted garlic and expensive candles, the kind my wife never would have wasted money on. My own modest home, worn but filled with memories, felt galaxies away from this carefully curated display. Melinda greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. Travis with a firm handshake that carried more performance than sincerity. Their neighbors and a few friends filled the living room, drinks in hand, voices loud with laughter. I could already tell I wasn't there for me. I was there for them to prove they were caring. Dutiful children looking after the old man. At the dinner table, I found myself at the far end. Conversations skipped past me like stones across water. Every time I opened my mouth, my words vanished into their laughter. The neighbors leaned toward Melinda and Travis, smiling, praising them for taking care of your father so well. My name was barely mentioned. My presence boiled down to a prop in their play. I sat quietly, cutting into food that had no taste, listening to my life story rewritten around me. Then Travis raised his glass, with a grin too wide to be genuine. He chuckled. "We've had to keep an eye on Dad's memory lately. He forgets the little things like bills and numbers. Good thing we're here to help." His words landed like a slap. Laughter rippled across the table. Melinda gave a small, nervous smile, but no defense, no correction. Just silence that hurt worse than the joke. Guests nodded knowingly, already convinced the old man at the end of the table was losing his grip. I kept my fork steady, though my hands wanted to tremble. Inside, an old storm brewed. My mind flashed back to decades ago, me working double shifts, scraping together enough to keep Melinda in school, buying her books, driving her to debates, teaching her that hard work meant something. Back then, I was her foundation. Now, I was their punchline. The fury pressed against my chest, but I swallowed it down. One outburst, and I would only prove their point. Instead, I let the humiliation sit heavy, simmering. Every laugh another reminder of how far I'd fallen in their eyes. When the plates cleared and dessert came and went, the evening finally wound down. As I stood to leave, Travis clapped a hand on my shoulder, leaning close so only I could hear. "Don't worry, old man," he whispered, his tone dripping with condescension. "We've got it from here." The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, but it didn't calm the fire inside. My feet carried me down their polished walkway, away from the glow of their staged life. For the first time, I realized I wasn't their father at that table. I was their trophy, their display piece, proof of their goodness to the world. But stripped of my dignity, I wasn't family that night. I was their display piece. The suggestion came late in the week, tucked into the same careful tone Melinda always used when she wanted me to agree without asking questions. "Dad, you should take a little vacation. Clear your head. You deserve it." Travis stood behind her, smiling that salesman smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes, a gift of relaxation. He called it, pressing the idea as if he were doing me a favor. Every instinct said no, but the weight of their insistence pressed harder. They had already packed a small suitcase for me, my old battered one with the taped handle. They promised flights were easy, everything arranged. And so, against my better judgment, I let them drive me to the airport. The sun hung low as we pulled into Asheville Regional. The car moved too quickly through the drop-off lane. Melinda leaned over, gave me a hug so quick it felt more like a formality, and avoided my eyes. Travis pressed an envelope into my hand. "Enjoy yourself," he said, voice clipped, almost rehearsed. Before I could ask a single question, their car merged back into traffic and disappeared. I stood there with the envelope in hand, my suitcase at my feet, and the world felt suddenly too quiet. The curbside crowd buzzed with families, couples, business travelers, all with someone waiting to see them off or waiting to receive them. Except me. My suitcase looked pitiful next to the glossy roller bags around me. A strip of duct tape held its handle together, a reminder of years spent making do, patching what we had instead of buying new. I remembered my wife's voice in the kitchen years ago, teasing me, "You deserve more than patched up things." Leroy, her words echoed now, and for the first time they stung. Inside the terminal, the air was cool, the hum of announcements filling the space. I found a seat near the gate, clutching the boarding pass like it held answers. I dialed Melinda, no answer. Tried again, straight to voicemail. Travis too. My stomach tightened. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about giving me rest. It was about getting me out of the way. Their careful smiles, the quick hugs, the way the car sped off, it all settled like heavy stones in my chest. I looked down at the boarding pass again, running a finger over the print. One word stopped me cold: one way. Not round trip, not temporary. One way. A chill crawled up my spine. My chest ached. The truth landed hard. They didn't send me to rest. They sent me away. The loudspeaker called for boarding, but all I heard was the roar of betrayal in my ears. Planes hummed on the runway, lifting others into freedom. But for me, the sound carried only exile. The gate was quieter than I expected for that hour. Just the low hum of announcements drifting overhead and the shuffle of strangers moving past me. My phone buzzed again on the armrest beside me. 18 missed calls, all from Melinda. I stared at the glowing screen, the number bold and insistent, like it could reach inside me and pull me back into her grasp. Why would she call me after leaving me here? Standing with a one-way ticket and an empty promise, I picked it up, hesitating. My thumb hovered, not ready to hear what her voice might sound like now. The first voicemail played, her voice almost syrupy. "Sweet Dad. Just making sure you're comfortable. Call me when you land." The next one was sharper, less polished. "Dad, please don't talk to anyone if they call about the house. Just trust us. Okay, just trust me." Her tone cracked on that last word, not out of love, out of fear. By the time I listened to the 12th message, her composure had slipped completely. Dad, it's important. Don't open any letters. Don't answer questions. We'll fix this, I promise. The phone trembled in my hand. Each word drew a clearer picture. They hadn't just taken advantage of me, they were trying to cover their tracks. Then came a text, sharp and cold. From Travis. Relax. Stop overthinking. We'll handle it. No greeting. No dad. Just an order, like I was a stubborn child. I could almost see his smirk behind those words. The same smirk he wore at the dinner table when he made a joke at my expense. It was the final pat on the shoulder. The kind that says, "You're done. Step aside." Anger simmered under my skin, but I held it close. Let it warm me instead of burn me. The terminal filled with the sounds of rolling suitcases and murmured goodbyes. Across the aisle, a pair of veterans in worn jackets passed, caps pulled low, each patch telling a story of where they'd served. I adjusted the brim of my own faded cap and felt the sting of shame rise. I had fought enemies overseas, slept in dirt, carried brothers out of fire, and came home believing I'd secured something worth protecting. And yet here I was, betrayed not by strangers, but by my own blood. The contrast was almost unbearable. Honor earned abroad, dignity stolen at home. I looked back at the phone, the screen dark now, heavy in my palm. I could almost hear my late wife's voice, steady, firm, reminding me that trust without caution was a door left unlocked. For a long while, I sat still, watching planes taxi into the night. Their engines roared like promises of escape, carrying people toward new beginnings. My reflection stared back at me in the terminal glass. Lined face and tired eyes. A man who had given everything, now asked to disappear quietly. But I wasn't disappearing. The thought slid from my chest to my lips in a whisper only I could hear. If I don't fight back now, they'll erase me completely. Resolve settled where despair had lived. My hands no longer shook. They had left me at this gate, but they hadn't stripped me of everything. They hadn't taken my will, and that will was stronger than any piece of paper, stronger than their schemes, stronger than the lies they piled high. The night outside stretched deep and unending, but in it I felt the first stirrings of direction. They thought they'd sent me away. They had no idea I was just beginning to return. The house was silent when I stepped back inside, suitcase still by the door, untouched since the ride to the airport. The stillness pressed down harder than any crowded terminal ever could. Shadows stretched long across the walls where my wife's pictures still hung. Her smile, frozen in black and white, carried more warmth than any I'd felt from my own daughter lately. Sitting alone in that quiet, the hum of betrayal echoed louder than the planes I'd left behind. My chest tightened. Loneliness wasn't new, but that night it felt heavier, sharper, almost unbearable. I wandered into the living room, and my eyes caught the old Bible sitting on the shelf, the one my wife always kept close. My hands reached for it, almost without thought, craving comfort. As I pulled it down, a folded envelope slipped out, fluttering to the floor. My breath caught. The handwriting, I'd know it anywhere. Hers, fingers trembling. I opened the letter. The scent of old paper rose up, mingled with something faintly floral, like the perfume she wore on Sundays. Her words spoke to me as though she was still here. Protect your dignity. Don't let greed tear apart what we built. I fear the children may forget what matters when money blinds them. But you must never forget who you are. Tears blurred the ink, but each word carved strength into my heart. She had seen this coming, maybe not the exact betrayal, but the shape of it. My wife had always been wiser than me when it came to people, and she had left me not just love, but guidance. I read on. She named a trusted friend, an old lawyer we both knew from church days. If you ever feel alone, call him. He will help you do what's right. A spark flared inside me. The pain of the past days was still raw, but something shifted. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't finished. They could humiliate me, trick me, abandon me, but they could not erase the man who had worked, sacrificed, and built this family from the ground up. I clutched the letter tight, whispering into the empty room. You saw this coming, didn't you, for the first time in days? Anger gave way to resolve. Tomorrow, I would make that call. If Melinda and Travis thought they had buried me, they forgot whose blood runs in my veins. The sun had barely crested over the blue ridge when I found myself awake, staring at the faint glow creeping across the ceiling of my bedroom. The letter from my wife rested on the nightstand. I had read it 3 times already, but still, I reached for it again, feeling the trembling edges beneath my fingertips. Her words gave me more strength than I had felt in weeks. I sat up slowly, dialing the number she had left in that neat, careful handwriting. My hands shook, not from age, but from hope mixed with fear. After a few rings, a voice answered, steady, deep, familiar. This is Carter. Hearing his name, I felt a rush of relief. Mr. Carter, our family's lawyer for decades, had once handled the closing on this very house. It's Leroy, I said, my voice catching. There was silence for a beat, then warmth. Leroy. It's been too long. By mid-morning, I was sitting across from him in his old oak-paneled office downtown. The place hadn't changed. Books lined the shelves, photos of his grandchildren on the desk, and that same smell of leather and dust. I laid the letter before him, explaining everything: the deed, the dinner, the airport, his brows furrowed, eyes narrowing with each word. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. Your wife was a wise woman, he murmured. From a drawer, he pulled out a thin folder, worn at the corners. She foresaw this possibility. She asked me to hold on to a copy of the deed, a version with protections built in. The air seemed to thicken. My heart pounded. You mean, she made sure the house couldn't be transferred without an additional signature, yours and hers together? And since she's gone, theirs is worthless. Shock rolled over me, followed by something sharper: empowerment. They thought they had won, but my wife had anticipated this betrayal. Carter explained the details patiently, the hidden clause, the safeguard my daughter and Travis never expected. Each word restored a piece of dignity that had been chipped away. I spent the rest of the afternoon digging through old boxes at home, photographs, receipts, letters, all evidence of the life I had built. Every paper felt like another stone in the foundation of my defense. I wasn't just gathering proof, I was reclaiming my story. When I met Carter again later, he looked over the stack with approval. We'll need to bring them in. Put the truth on the table. The idea of a family meeting filled me with dread and anticipation alike. My heart pounded at the thought of confronting them face to face. Not as a broken old man, but as a father standing his ground. That night, I sat staring at the clock, the house wrapped in silence. Tomorrow would not be quiet. Tomorrow, they would hear the truth. If they thought they had silenced me, they were wrong. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm I'd weathered in my lifetime. The living room, once filled with voices raised in defiance, now seemed suffocated by the truth I had laid bare. My daughter's eyes refused to meet mine, her hands clutching her skirt like a child caught stealing cookies. Travis sat stiff beside her, jaw tight, fists pressed against his knees. Across from them, my younger son shifted uncomfortably, his gaze moving between me and his sister as if torn in two. The neighbors, who had insisted on staying after Carter asked them to witness the confrontation, whispered among themselves. Their stares felt like nails against the skin, some sympathetic, others curious, all of them judging. My wife's picture still hung on the far wall, her smile warm and unchanging, but I couldn't bear to look at it now. The woman who had believed in family above all else could never have imagined seeing her daughter in this position. Then Travis stood, the silence breaking like glass. "This is a fraud," he barked. voice trembling not with fear but rage. He's old. He doesn't know what he's talking about anymore. That deed isn't real. It can't be. Melinda echoed him, though her voice cracked on the words. Dad, maybe you're confused. You've been under a lot of stress. You've been forgetful. She forced the words out, but I saw the hesitation, the way her hands trembled, betraying the lie. Before I could respond, Carter, calm as a preacher in Sunday service, cleared his throat. This deed is the original, he said firmly, holding it high enough for everyone to see. It was safeguarded precisely because your late mother anticipated there could be trouble. By law. This document stands. Nothing your father signed afterward can override it. His words settled over the room like a hammer striking steel. The sting in my chest wasn't from relief, but from the realization of what they had just said. My own blood, standing before neighbors and kin, questioning my sanity as if it were their shield. They weren't just denying their scheme, they were denying me. My younger son, quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice cut through the air sharper than any blade. Dad never deserved this. He turned to face his sister, eyes blazing. You've taken advantage of him. You've humiliated him. And now you stand here pretending like he doesn't know what's real. Melinda's glare snapped to him, venom in her eyes. You don't understand. You've never been around. You don't know what it's like to carry responsibility. That's not responsibility, he shot back. That's greed. The room fractured with their clash. Voices rising, neighbors gasping. Carter sitting back, letting the truth reveal itself through their fury. The air turned into a battlefield. No sides left hidden. Supporters and skeptics formed silently in their chairs, eyes moving between me and my children. I sat in the center, watching my family tear itself apart. The weight of every sacrifice I had made through the years pressed down on me. I had worked myself to the bone to put food on this table, to put Melinda through college, to give them more than I had ever known. Now, in this very room, I realized those years of giving had not built unity, they had built entitlement. From the corner, I heard a neighbor whisper, "So they really tried to steal his house." Another voice followed, hushed but heavy with condemnation. Shameful. The church elder, Mr. Jacobs, who had known my wife since they were children, shook his head slowly, eyes fixed on Melinda. "Your mother would never have stood for this," he said softly, but loud enough for the weight to land where it belonged. The first ripple of shame spread across their faces. It wasn't just me anymore. It was the community, the people whose respect they had courted, now looking at them with disappointment and disgust. The social foundation they clung to began to crack. Melinda rose abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. Her face was pale, her voice sharp. "I don't have to sit here and be humiliated." She grabbed her husband's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Come on." Travis followed, though his shoulders stiffened in defiance. They stormed out, the door slamming behind them with a finality that rattled the walls. The sound echoed long after their footsteps faded. And then, silence again. Only this time, it wasn't charged with confrontation. It was emptier. I sat there with the deed still in my hand, victory hollow in my chest. The neighbors lingered for a moment longer, murmuring to one another before quietly leaving. A few family members who had stayed offered me sympathetic glances, but no words of comfort came. Sympathy wasn't what I wanted. It couldn't patch what had just shattered. The living room, my living room, had become a graveyard of trust. My wife's photo seemed to watch me still, her eyes warm, but they cut through me now like a reminder of everything slipping away. I clutched the documents closer, knowing I had protected my house, but wondering if I had lost something far greater in the process. My voice broke the silence, though it was no more than a whisper to myself. I may have saved my home, But what of my family? The ache of that question stayed with me long after the last guest left, long after the lights were turned off, long after I sat in the darkness with only the sound of my own breathing for company. I had won the battle for my house, but in that silence, I feared I had lost my daughter forever. The days after the confrontation were colder than any winter. My phone stayed silent, and the weight of what happened lingered on every corner of my home. Morning light kept finding the same dust motes turning in the air, like a slow parade of what used to be. I drifted from room to room, straightening picture frames that didn't need straightening, closing cabinets that were already shut. The house felt both defended and empty. Victory, it turned out, made a poor companion. Outside, autumn had swept through Asheville. The maple in the yard threw off leaves like tired confessions, copper and gold and auburn settling into the grass. I raked a little and then stopped, thinking of her, how she'd hum while we bagged leaves together, how she'd tuck a few bright ones into a book so we could find them in February. Those small rituals had been a kind of glue. Now the pages still sat on the shelf, thin and patient, and the glue felt brittle. Neighbors waved from a distance. Some crossed the street to squeeze my shoulder and say they'd heard. "We're praying, Mr. Lee," one of the church ladies whispered, as if prayer were a fragile thing that could break if spoken too loud. Their kindness warmed a corner of the house, but only a corner. The larger rooms remained quiet, full of the echo of her voice telling me once, long ago, that home is where people choose to be gentle with each other. The gentleness was gone. Word moved fast through town. On Sunday, I slipped into a back pew, heads turned, not at me, but at the empty space where my daughter usually sat, regal and assured. After service, folks lingered in knots, voices low. A few came over with casseroles and apologies for not knowing what to say. The elder who had known my wife shook his head, his sigh carrying a weight I felt in my ribs. "Sometimes truth hurts worse than a lie," he said, "but it lasts longer." I nodded, unsure if that was comfort or a warning. By Tuesday, I heard how invitations to dinner at my daughter's house had slowed. There were awkward cancellations and polite excuses. Travis's big jokes no longer landed at the coffee shop. People stared through him as if the punchline had gone stale. I didn't ask for any of it, but seeing the shine come off that pair felt like watching a mask lose its glue in the heat. Vindication isn't joy. It's just the absence of being called a fool. Carter kept busy. He sent me copies of filings that looked like carefully stacked bricks petitions, notices, and a letter to the bank that read like a locked door. He explained the layers again. How my wife's foresight made a fence in the law that was hard to climb. There were murmurs about inquiries into credit accounts opened under my name. He didn't promise punishment, only process. "We protect what's yours," he said. "Let the rest take its course." I thanked him and poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, one for a man who had left the office an hour earlier, and one for the woman who would never again take cream. At night, I sat by the fireplace and let the flicker draw stories on the ceiling. Sparks popped like distant memories. The house breathed differently now, as if relieved and grieving in the same inhale. I traced the decades in my mind, shipping out in a uniform that smelled like starch and gasoline. Coming back to a town that hadn't learned my name. Working overtime until hands turned to knots. Tucking kids into bed. Promising them this roof would never leak on their dreams. Somewhere in that long road, the promise got confused with the deed, and love got measured in signatures. A thought kept circling. Was I fighting to keep lumber and shingles, or to keep the last warm echo of my wife alive? Both answers felt true. The mantel still held her photo, the one with sunlight in her eyes. That light had pushed me through 100 tired mornings. It pushed me now, too, toward something sturdier than anger. She had asked me to stand up for our name without losing my own. On Thursday, the mailbox yawned open to bills, flyers, and one stained envelope. Melinda's handwriting tilted across it, familiar and rushed. For a moment, the yard tilted too. I brought the letter inside and set it on the kitchen table, the same spot where she once did homework while I paid utilities and tried to stretch groceries until Friday. My hands hovered. The kettle whistled, then quieted. The clock on the stove ticked loud enough to feel like disapproval. I didn't open it. Not yet. I traced the curve of her L and the cross of her T, remembering how she used to sign handmade cards with a heart tucked inside her name. My thumb could feel the slight ridge where she pressed too hard on the R. That's how she'd always been pressing hard, trying to make the page listen. Maybe the letter held an apology. Maybe it held a defense sharp enough to cut whatever soft pieces were left in me. Hope and dread pitched their tents on the same patch of ground. I walked the rooms again, carrying the envelope like it might spill. In the hallway, a floorboard answered underfoot, the exact creak that used to announce teenagers sneaking in late. In the living room, the fire had gone down to a soft red hush. Outside, leaves scratched at the window as the wind nudged them along. It all felt like a chorus of small, loyal sounds, urging patience, urging care. On the counter sat the Bible that had given me my wife's warning. I placed the envelope beside it, palm flat, feeling the parchment cool under the skin. If there was a confession, I could stand to read it. If there was a final cut, I could stand to bleed and still stand. The house had survived their ambition. I had survived their plan. Surviving the truth, whatever shape it took, would be the last test of this old spine. I poured a cup of coffee, black this time, and took the chair that faced the yard. A gust lifted a whirl of leaves into a small dance, then let them fall. The day dimmed toward evening. Somewhere in town, the chatter about our family would keep circling, but inside these walls, the only voice that mattered waited behind a thin fold of paper. My hand trembled once and settled. I held her letter close, not knowing if it would mend the wound or tear it deeper. The letter lay where sleep couldn't touch it, beside the coffee mug, beneath the wash of first light. All night, its shape had pressed through my eyelids like a stubborn moon. At dawn, hands found the envelope again, felt the rough edge where the stamp tilted, the faint grit of dry dust along the flap. The seal gave with a soft sigh. Paper trembled in my grip the way a truth trembles right before it stops pretending. Her handwriting rose up to meet me, the same looping confidence from grade school notes that once said, "I love you, Daddy," misspelling love as if joy had too many letters to hold. The first lines cut. Accusations marched, tidy and certain how trust had never come easy in this house, how rules lived louder than tenderness, how the younger one got slack while she got standards. She wrote that my caution around money made her feel like a stranger to her own future, that every "be careful" sounded like "you're not enough." Words pressed hard enough to dent the page beneath, the way she always wrote when her feelings outran her breath. Chest tightened, not from surprise, but from the familiar ache of hearing the past from a corner I hadn't stood in. She said I'd never believed in her judgment, that I clung to a world where bills got paid before dreams did, that I hid affection behind lectures about overtime and interest rates, and the price of shoes that would be outgrown by August. She named the nights I missed a choir solo, the mornings I left before dawn so the lights would stay on. It read like a ledger of absence. And still, what stung most wasn't the charge itself, it was how carefully she'd kept the receipts. Halfway through, the heat thinned. Between two jagged sentences, a line softened the paper. "Sometimes I wish I could just be your little girl again." The letters shrank there, as if afraid to be seen. A breath I didn't know I'd been holding let itself go. Hope isn't a cure, but it can be a bandage. That one sentence settled like a hand on my shoulder. Not quite forgiveness, not quite apology, but a memory of how we used to fit inside the same moment without arguing about who was right. She circled back to the mess we were in. She said the house had become a symbol, a crown she thought would finally prove she could carry what I carried. She admitted Travis talked fast and made everything sound legal and neat. She admitted she liked the way people looked at them when they talked about taking care of Dad. Then the ink grew shaky. I didn't plan the airport, she wrote. But I didn't stop it either. The honesty stung worse than a lie. Choice has a face even when it hides behind circumstance. The last paragraph flickered between defense and regret. She insisted she wasn't a thief. She claimed she wanted to streamline, to modernize, to protect me from someday. Then I know you think I betrayed you. Maybe I did. But I felt betrayed long before contracts and keys. She asked if there was a way back. She didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't say I'm done. She asked a question only time and humility could answer. Is there anything left of us worth saving? Paper lowered to the table. The room kept its quiet. Sunlight climbed the wall to the clock, paused on the frame of our wedding photo, slid across the countertop where tiny knife marks mapped a lifetime of dinners. Where did we lose each other? The question left my lips before I meant to speak. I could list the years by their tiredness shifts stacked on shifts, a body that ached down to the nails. I could list the choices that felt noble then, and complicated now. Discipline when a hug would have done, a lecture when a listening would have saved us an hour of sorrow later. I could admit how much I leaned on her mother to translate love into the softer language daughters sometimes need. What she couldn't see then, and perhaps still couldn't, was the fear under all that caution. The kind that sneaks into a man who once came home to find the light bill pink and the pantry thin. The kind that hears vacation and thinks debt, hears investment and thinks scam. Fear can turn love into rules. Rules can sound like doubt. Doubt can turn a proud girl into someone ready to grab a deed like proof. Betrayal grows in that soil, watered by silence. I set the letter beside the Bible and rubbed the ridge where her pen had pressed. The page had my daughter's temperature in it, a fever of old pain. Forgiveness isn't a door you throw open. It's a weight you lift a half-inch at a time. Accountability isn't a hammer. It's a straight edge you keep on the table while you talk. Somewhere between those two. A path waited for our feet. A blank sheet waited. 2. Pen hovered. A lifetime seemed to balance on its tip. Words came and went. One draft began with anger and ended with judgment. It died in the trash. Another began with apology and drifted into excuses. It folded itself into a tight square and sat beside the mug until the condensation blurred the ink. The house was safe now. But what about the house inside us, the one built of habits and glances and small rituals, the one that had sprung a leak years ago? Maybe the day I walked past her bedroom door, sharing numbers instead of attention. I tried again, starting not with the deed or the airport or the neighbor's whispers, but with what I had failed to say for too long, that loving a child isn't the same as understanding her. That fear had run too much of this house, that my voice came out hard when my heart wanted soft. The pen found steadier ground. I wrote that what she did was wrong, not just in law but in trust. I wrote that consequences were not cruelty. They were the only way grown people learned where the edges of other people's lives begin. I wrote that the door wasn't closed if she wanted to knock without entitlement, without Travis's shadow at her shoulder, without any paperwork between us but the birth certificate that started this whole story. The pen paused. The choice raised its head again, reconciliation or a clean cut. Truth is, both roads had thorns. Letting her back without change would invite rot. Cutting her off forever would calcify grief into bitterness, and bitterness makes a poor heirloom. My wife's letter had asked me to defend our legacy without losing the man I promised to be. That promise included mercy that didn't make me foolish and boundaries that didn't make me cruel. Outside, The maple nodded in a breeze that promised colder days. Inside, the kettle ticked as it cooled. I placed my palm over her letter, and then over my words, measuring the heat in both, somewhere downtown. Carter's filings moved through a clerk's hands like stones being set in a wall, somewhere across town. My daughter read the quiet coming back at her from 100 people who used to laugh at her jokes. Somewhere in each of us, a child still listened for a voice that said, clear and steady, I see you, I love you, and I won't let you hurt me to prove it. When the pen lifted again, the page held a beginning firm, not final. I didn't yet write the last line. Some endings are earned, not declared. I let the ink dry and folded the sheet once, twice, like a man folding a flag with care. Not because it's perfect, but because it matters. My pen hovered, as if the weight of a lifetime balanced on its tip. The reply came slowly, after a long night at the kitchen table, pen scratching across paper under the dim light above. Each word weighed heavy, but clear. I didn't write in anger. I didn't write to wound her. I wrote to remind her that no matter how far she tried to push me out, I was still here. You may hate me, but you won't erase me. The words sat sharp on the page, final but not cruel. I folded the letter, slipped it into the envelope, and placed it by the door for the morning mail. Walking through the house afterward, there was a strange calm. My home wasn't grand, but it carried my wife's laughter in its walls, the smell of her cooking in its kitchen, the warmth of nights when the children were still little and safe. That wasn't something anyone could sign away, not with legal jargon, not with tricks, not with forged affection. Later that week, Carter, my lawyer, called me to the courthouse. We sat in the oak-paneled room as the papers were laid out. His voice was steady, his finger pointing to the clause buried deep in the deed. My wife had insisted on it years ago, almost like she had known the day would come. The clause required my direct presence and approval in person for any transfer of the house. Without it, everything Melinda and Travis tried to build on my back collapsed in a breath. The courtroom grew still as the reality sank in. Their faces told the story, Travis pale and seething, Melinda trembling between shame and fury. My heart pounded, but I stood tall. This wasn't revenge, it was truth. Justice. Back home, the confrontation came again. Not in whispers, but in shouts. My daughter's voice cracked through the living room. You've always chosen everyone else over me, now you betray me again. The words stung, but I didn't flinch. You betrayed me first. Child, I answered quietly, firmly. The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. Relatives who had stayed quiet before finally spoke. They saw her greed for what it was. Some shook their heads. Some walked out. And I sat, steady as the old oak out front, watching the storm break around me. For the first time in years, I felt not like a man losing everything, but like a man who had kept his ground. The decision came easy after that. My house would remain mine as long as I drew breath, but I wouldn't leave it to Melinda or Travis. Instead, I made the choice to pass it directly to my grandchildren one day. They would inherit not just wood and stone, but a lesson that legacy is not built on betrayal, but on respect and responsibility. As autumn leaves blew across the porch, I sat in my old chair, the sunset spilling orange across the yard. I whispered into the wind. Almost as if to my wife, I was silent, but never weak. The story wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity, about standing tall when those closest tried to cut me down, about proving that justice doesn't always roar. It sometimes speaks softly, with the weight of truth behind it. They thought they stripped me of my home. They thought they could erase me. But I walked back into that house every night with my head high. My soul, my dignity, and my legacy, they all remained mine.